kill them if you try long enough.
Yeah, you got. Folks, Tuesday night Bible study in the big city of Hume. We're in Genesis chapter 38. And we're going to jump into 39. Last week we had technical difficulties with the computer. So we went ahead and read 38 for you viewers on YouTube and all the rest of it, Zoom. Well, like I said, we'll go have a brief in it so you can catch up with us. Then we'll jump right into 39. But grab your Bibles, open them up, take a deep seat, and enjoy and welcome you newcomers.
That's pretty weak.
What is?
Me.
Oh,
And so weak, he didn't even hear me. Yeah,
I heard the whoop whoop.
okay. That's what I'm talking about. That's right. Dear Heavenly Father, Father, we're thankful, we're grateful, Father. Father, you placed us at this time and this spot for your purpose, Father. Father, I ask the Holy Spirit just guides this message and puts us in the right direction that we need to go, Father. Father, we're so thankful for what your son did on that cross, Father. He willfully took that cross. He took our punishment. He bore our sin, even though he was sinless, Father. Father, we also know that he walked out of that grave for us, Father. Let that be our primary focus. In your son's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
38.
A quick recap who we want.
Well,
It's some of the bad stuff. And some of the good.
Well, we take 38 as an intermission almost from dealing with Joseph and his brothers and their difficulties. And we go back to Judah in 38. And when we find Judah, he has moved away from his father and his brothers, kind of doing his own thing, got married, has some kids. Finds one of them a wife from what seems to be a good family. He is evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord kills him. So, as I guess the local tradition in that day, to be a kinsman redeemer and to have children to continue the line, Tamar, the wife that Judah took for his first son, is given to his second son, who also does evil in the sight of the Lord. He dies. The third son isn't old enough to be wed yet, and so Judah puts her out of sight and out of mind so that she doesn't kill him too, in his mind. As things progress, he basically keeps putting her on the back burner. The third son becomes of age and she realizes nothing's happening here. So she sets a trap for Judah, who walks right into it.
What was the trap?
She pretends to be a harlot at the gates of a city that she knows he's going to. When he comes into her, she asks for his identity, his staff and his seal. That's like having your checkbook, and I'd say your passport all in
Yes,
one,
me too.
and maybe your debit card too.
Yeah.
Back then, because
It's your passport.
really could have done some damage with that stuff.
Yeah.
And then when he goes to pay her and redeem his staff and seal as his pledge, she's gone.
I think he didn't have money,
He's gonna give her sheets.
so I will give you this stuff here. And then,
Go, yeah,
yeah, as payment, you hold on to this stuff until I come back. Yeah, then he comes back. I think this is always where I think, you didn't recognize your daughter-in-law?
That's because he probably hasn't spoken to her, right? It's
Not, yeah, you know,
It's
she's
several years.
probably just,
well,
But
she
I-
tricked him, she dressed up like a hooker.
there's no way that my
So-
daughter-in-law could just put something over her face and talk in a different voice, and I'm not gonna know who she is.
Yeah,
And I'm like, come on, calm down.
But
Yeah, but-
anyway,
It's just always interesting.
I don't think he'd seen her in probably 10
You're
years,
right,
but
their families are huge, maybe it's like there's 300 of us, I haven't seen everyone in Hume today, so probably some people I ain't seen in a while.
anyway, when she comes up pregnant, I think I'm reading into the things here a little bit, but I think he was extremely mad.
Yeah.
And says basically burn her to death. But
mm,
doesn't- And when she learns that he's going to condemn her to death, she says, I'm pregnant by the man whom these belong to, and give him back his staff and seal. At which point he realizes that, and for what she did, that was wrong. He was so much more in the wrong. He says, you are more righteous than I. Takes care of her, but puts her away, never knows her any further as far as being his wife or anything, but does take care of the two sons that are born. We see a little bit of history here again where it's twins that are fighting with each other as they're born. And then the twins' names come from the idea that the one of them stuck their hand out first. They tied the cord around to see who was going to be the firstborn, then he was pulled back in, I guess, and the other one came out first. Kind of strange, but hey,
Would be
uh,
cold.
and then we leave Judah and go back to Joseph, Egypt again at 39.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything to that? It's pretty good synopsis.
Nailed it all down just about.
Synopsis is one of the few things I did well in English, so.
Like saying, is there anybody downrange? You see nobody here.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is.
how the story comes to be, I think Judah left because of all the turmoil with all the brothers and all the fighting on and all that. And Jacob refusing to be consoled or, he won't quit grieving for Joseph and he can't stand in sight and all. And so I think that's what pushes him away. And so we see that this period of time between the time that Joseph was sold into slavery and this time through here is long enough. And Judah can go get a wife, have children, and they grow up. So you're talking some 20 years in this span here. So this is not, it gives us a little bit of a timetable in here, realizing how some of these things going. And this is kind of like Josiah said, and now we go back and we do a flashback to where Joseph's at and what's been going on him with during this time period since he's been sold. And so the turmoil probably continues in Jacob's house. Judah thought he was going to get away from it. Back to where that, so the turmoil probably
Sort
Yeah, anyhow,
Check 1, 2.
of. I don't know what it is. Sometimes it doesn't go in the Baptist. thing, So I'm like, always make sure that's there.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think I'm not done, just the idea that it gives us a little bit of time span and we don't know exactly how long everything has been. Time span, but it's not been just a year or two, it's been
Several years.
several years, yes. And now we go back and get a picture of what's going on in Joseph during this time. There's a lot of stuff in chapter 38, a lot of symbolic stuff, but it's basically. Like I said, an intermission. And some of the action, or we're jumping from place to place. What's going on? Makes you wonder what it was like with, I do anyhow, with the other brothers and Jacob for those 20 some odd years. How much did the turmoil continue?
You never know. We'll ask them when we get there. Probably won't care, actually.
That's a good possibility.
$39. Let's go 1 through 6. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Ethiopian, brought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which he had brought down, which brought him down hither. And the Lord was with Joseph. He was a prosperous man. He was in the house of the master of the Egyptian. And the master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he had did to prosper at in his hand. And Joseph found grace in the sight, and he served him. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. And he came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, and over that all he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored.
Now they're in. First one, where it says captain of the guard, yours says an Ethiopian.
Mhm.
Write it down.
One of the few more significant translation changes I've seen in the New King James. Where mine says Egyptian,
Oh, I'm sorry, Egyptian.
it does read
It
Egyptian.
does say Egyptian. Yes, you're right. Sorry, internet. Complain Bart for not being here for that.
What I was going to say there though, and I still think it's probably true. We tend to think of Egypt as what we see on the map now.
Yeah.
I think we need to remember that the lines currently and the international boundaries are not what
It
was
was
probably existing back then.
it was much bigger.
There's a good chance Ethiopia was considered part of Egypt. Or I should say the area we now know as Ethiopia was
Right.
considered.
What do we got 1 through 6 there?
Well, the good Lord blessed him, because Joseph.
And I'm seeing here is it 1 through 6 of the summary, what I just did with chapter 28, they're doing with beginning of 39 here to catch you back up with what's been going on with Joseph.
Living a good life.
Well, I would say that God's promise is still being fulfilled. I will bless those that bless you.
Yeah.
So Potiphar sees that Joseph, everything that he does is good. And he basically puts him in charge of everything. So it might appear that, yes, he's in prison, he's a slave. God is blessing him, and his blessings are so good that his slave master can see that this guy's blessed, this guy's good. Everything that he does is good. Everything that he's in charge of is good. So I think sometimes we might think we're at a cursing, but other people are seeing us that we're being blessed. And this guy's blessed that he can do this and with whatever it is that we're doing. Then also I think on the opposite side of that, I think that's why some people hate us as Christians. And they can't quite put their finger on it. They just see us. And there's just something about that person I don't like. It's probably because that we're completely different than what the world is, and they can see that.
And like I said earlier, we're blessed. People are jealous. A lot of people are jealous of that. The ones that don't believe in God.
We represent God.
Mm-hmm.
That has goodly, that meant that life, and Joseph was a goodly person, is that right?
Yes. Say it's probably more good to look at.
Well, the New King James lessons there, now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
He's good looking.
What we see is that in God's blessing, sometimes the world does not always react as we would think. Parts of it. The Potiphar reacted in a normal way and saying, okay, I figured out why this is all working and he's the reason for it, so I'm gonna elevate him up. But in that also comes challenges. You know, how do we handle the prosperity? We need to go a little bit further before we get into it, but how do we handle the blessings? It's very important. You can go back to Deuteronomy 28, and look at, it says, because you did not honor me during the good times. Talking about future events for Israel and the fact that they would fall away from God. God had blessed the nation Israel. And because they had been blessed, they thought it was their works, and therefore they became arrogant on their own part. We got to be careful that we don't get away from recognizing that the blessings come from God. And Joseph did a good job of that.
Let's read 7 through 10.
And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said until his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There's none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake unto Joseph day by day, that he hearkeneth not unto her to lie with her or to be with her. I'm gonna keep going.
Well, excuse me a second. That's kind of what, that's why it's what you said. Exactly what you said. When he knew what he did was right, you know, he didn't take his blessing for granted. He said, I'm not gonna do this. And I think about, he literally had one rule. How we started in the beginning, Adam and Eve had one rule. You know, he gave me everything except you.
Right.
And, you know, he kept to that. Yeah.
And so, because of how one person and all that's around wants to deal with the situation for their own selfish interest, the bottom falls out, doesn't it? That was what you want. I know I'm alluding to on the hand, it causes problems up and down the line. So we tend to think, did it cause God a problem?
No, God don't have problems. He can deal with them quick.
I'll say this, Joseph seems to have a real understanding of authority and responsibility. How did the two go together? That's pretty amazing, really.
We could use some people like that in Washington DC, right?
Yeah, when you got a good looking woman, I guess, probably, I don't know, trying to lure you into bed, that's.
It wouldn't be easy, would it?
That'd be pretty tempting. But
Yeah.
The young man had a good head on his shoulders. This ain't for me, this ain't for me.
And basically it's saying because of that one time, he's trying to avoid her.
Yep. Well, I would, he did the right thing.
But she's staying after him too. That's another hard thing
Yeah,
for a
she-
man.
Right.
To stay, when, I mean,
Every
first
time.
time you reject them, like, nah, it ain't working, but when they stay after you, that gets
Yeah,
hard.
sometimes, yeah, the old sinful lust kicks in.
Yeah.
He'll never know it.
And if he'd have done that, stop and think about it, it'd been one of us, I'd shot you,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah,
that's a death
It
sentence.
would have been too,
Yeah.
but,
she had the
I
lie.
think AR-15s were illegal in Egypt back then.
The booty knife wasn't.
there at the end, it says. Not only did he, would he not lie with her, he wouldn't even be with her.
Mhm.
Yeah.
After she failed on one front, she tried to just, oh, come spend time with me, we'll hang out, we'll drink tea or. We'll read poetry or whatever she thought was an entertaining thing to do. And he's going, I'm not stepping into that trap either.
Yeah. it's a beast thing.
Let's go 11 through 13.
But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside. That she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard that I lift my voice and cried out, that he lifted his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until the master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like this, saying, the Hebrew servant who you brought to us came in to me to mock me. Okay, I went to 18.
So good.
Yeah, she was gonna get revenge because he wouldn't lie with her.
Well, she's a scorned woman now. He turned her down so many times. She's scorned.
She was gonna turn it.
Oh, yeah.
They don't have no fury of a woman's scorn.
Yeah, she was mad. He rejected her. She's gonna get even by telling her husband to lie.
Trying to get him killed.
Yeah,
Well, what I found interesting here is. And I hope it's as clear in the old Aramaic or whatever the original text was in, the Hebrew servant.
Yes.
Now that's interesting
Yes.
because. The Hebrews started with. Father Abraham. The Hebrews have only been around for 4 generations at this point. Think about it.
Yeah.
He's number 4 in the generational line of Hebrews. And they weren't really established as a people until well into Jacob's line. And you're still talking about 12 sons that will form their own family groups. How is it that she recognizes him as a Hebrew?
that's what I was getting at. How would she know he was a Hebrew? And because of the,
Well, we talked about when Jacob was making pacts with his father-in-law.
Yeah.
And they made it in fear of Isaac, or the God of Isaac. Isaac, I'm thinking this shows us real clear here, the influence Abraham and Isaac had when they passed through places like Sodom and Gomorrah when they went to rescue Lot. We need to get our heads around just how influential Abraham and Isaac, and probably Jacob was not unknown. They probably didn't know exactly which kid this was, but Jacob was probably not an unknown man. They made a big enough splash in this area. They had enough wealth, they had enough manpower, they had enough prestige that they had already established themselves as being different in just 4 generations.
Okay, let's go back to Abraham for just a little bit though. Didn't he have a little deal with a Pharaoh in Egypt at that time? And the Pharaoh gave him a lot of stuff because of what happened in that circumstance. And so they understand that the God of Abraham may be different than their God. They already have a little bit of background that this God's more powerful than all the rest because he was able to bring this about. So the idea of the God that he worshiped being different and then not understanding all that, and plus Abraham, that, yes, that was years ago, but I would imagine some of those stories persist about some of those that comes down, and Pharaoh would probably could have easily had somebody look it up in their records, so they had pretty detailed records.
I'm gonna say he spoke a different language
I think that helps.
and his dress was
Or
different.
certainly his accent was different than anybody else's.
He probably we'll know later, he does speak Egyptian. What caught my attention in this little passage here, is what does she do? 2 things. 1, flee sexual temptation, flee. Joseph is anytime it ever comes up, that's always my example. Sometimes you gotta run away. He did it naked, wouldn't suggest that one, somebody will call the cops on you, but sometimes you gotta run away. Remove yourself from that situation, period. Because it's not gonna be any good for anybody involved. But also, what is the first thing that she did in verse 14 and 17? See, he hath brought in Hebrew unto us to mock us. The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in to mock me. She is shifting blame to her husband.
Yes.
She shifted what she did, she shifted her blame to somebody else, and it takes me back to Genesis chapter 3.
Yes.
Everybody pointed the finger at somebody else. Yeah.
She'd have been probably killed if she would have admitted she had desires for that man.
Well, she could have just done nothing. Or she could have just hid his clothing and
God could have left him alone after the first rejection.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that wouldn't get him where God needs him to be now, would it? Yeah. Well, actually, I think it probably would have. It just, if we wouldn't know this would be a different route, but hey.
let's go to the end of the chapter.
Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you have brought to us came into me and mocked me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that he was angered, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper.
So basically, he prospered even after that thing that he went through. I mean,
sometimes we think the Lord has cursed him when he goes to prison. That isn't the case, is it?
No,
But it sure seems like out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yes, and it seems like with Potiphar's wife, that he was doomed either way he went. One way, he would have surely been killed.
Yep.
If found out, and the other way, he was thrown into the dungeon. And this is the king's private dungeon almost, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a place that's probably not gonna go real well. And yet Joseph is blessed by God even there. But I just look at some of the parallels here and we're either slaves or prisoners to sin, or we're slaves to righteousness. Which is it? And so God got Joseph exactly where he wanted him. He couldn't put him any lower. He's been demoted to the lowest place in Egypt that you could possibly be.
From the prison dungeon.
That down in the dungeon and the lower levels and the king's own personal thing, and don't look like it's going to go well, and you're thinking, how can God prosper me here? How come he put me here would be one of the questions we ought to ask ourselves, but there was a purpose. And so God's getting ready to raise him up to be actually in many regards greater than Pharaoh himself. But first he has to get him down to that lowest level
right.
and yet continue to show Joseph that he was with him at all times. That he would never leave him or forsake him. And so we look at the blessings that we have in God and realize even when we're down in the very lowest dungeon, prison, whatever the world can do with us, God is still going to be with us in some way. We might not like it at times. I'm sure there were times when Joseph didn't like it. But God still blessed him. It wasn't that Joseph could do these things by himself.
Right.
Yeah, how bad could it get? He was already thrown in the pit by his brothers.
yep,
And
that is
sold
something.
into slavery, like how worse can this
I
get?
mean, on his brother's behalf, they did get him out of the pit.
Yeah, but they were gonna,
Just to sell him.
yeah. And then go there and get sold into slavery to a king, a pharaoh.
At that point, you're thinking, well, at least I was bought to a rich man who seems to trust him and like him.
Yeah,
Well,
and the bottom falls out again. Yeah, like here I go again.
there's a phrase that's used in a lot of movies and Disney really likes it. And it goes something like this. Well, it can't get any worse than this. But it can.
Keep stumbling, but he keeps on believing in the Lord though. He
And
doesn't give up.
sometimes if you watch, if God has given someone the ability to lead, they'll lead no matter where they are and they'll prosper because of their leadership. And no matter how low Joseph gets, and that's what got him in trouble with his brothers. Hey, you're all gonna one day bow down to me. And they didn't like that. And
He didn't actually say it like that, but.
that was Bart Hellbelly. You said I could talk, Bart Hellbelly.
Good.
Okay.
But to bring that dream to reality, this all was needed. He has to get him to where he needs him to be so he can bring what vision he had given to him before to bring it to be true,
Mhm.
to fulfill. It's not a way that we would have chosen to got there, is it?
I mean, what chance does someone who's a slave and then a prisoner, and he's still a slave, by the way, he's not been released yet.
No. That's right. The entire life.
He's went from being the favorite son of a fairly wealthy man to the slave of a wealthy man to the slave prisoner of a wealthy man who's just probably waiting on the final judgment of his master to see what his master wants to do with him.
Condemn him or, yeah.
Do we ever think in church when we ask for prayer that are we able to handle where it might end up? I mean, he's gonna answer the prayer, but are we able to handle?
You don't see so much of it in this story, but there are other scriptural stories where you clearly see, or I think it's pretty clear, God had at least two paths for people to take to get where he wanted them to be. There's the godly way, which is going to go much smoother. And then there's the
Belly of the
do it
whale.
my own way, belly of the whale way. I don't want to say get your hair cut by a temptress way, was the story I was thinking of. And you know what? God is still going to use you for your purpose.
I thought Mark was gonna make a point there, and I think I interrupted him. You were talking about if you're a leader, you're gonna get prospered at where you're at. And I did interrupt you, trying to be funny, sometimes messes everything up, but you were right. He was the leader of the family at a young age. The father was sending him to go do things, right or wrong, favoritism, I get all that, but I think you're onto something. He was already showing leadership potential and traits at that level, doing that. Yeah.
Did you ever notice you could go to NCO school, but that didn't make you an NCO?
What we were talking about before we went online, which I'm not gonna talk about online. Absolutely, just because you got in your corporal stripes, don't mean you're an NCO. Yeah.
I didn't know you guys had talked about that.
I'll tell you.
Earlier.
Yeah, we said something very similar earlier, yeah.
I didn't make it, I didn't finish because I was fixing to get out, but there was so much crying in NCO school. You'd have thought it was worse than basic. Them guys, I ain't going this, I shouldn't have to go through basic again. Anyway,
Entitlements. We were
And
talking
it's-
about that earlier.
Yeah.
Or we talked to Jason to it earlier with the idea that people feel when things are good, that this is somehow owed to them. Even though they themselves are not put in the work to get it.
We're talking about earlier, and that's all I'm gonna say, Jim, that sometimes, Bart, you understand that E3 can get promoted to corporal.
mhm.
So you went from private to a nobody NCO, then no one's gonna give any respect. And
Mhm.
sometimes that corporal don't know how to act. It's like you gave him a Superman cape and he's running around screaming at everybody. And be careful because a real NCO might just knock you out. But
Second lieutenant's coming fresh out of.
that's my favorite. That's with all due respect. You're here, oh, stop, sir, you're here to sign this right here, you sign that, okay, you have a good day and go somewhere else. Okay, thank you. And that's Sergeant E5 type, Staff Sergeant, and E7 was worse. Yeah, don't even come in my area of operation unless you want something.
Yeah.
You know, what we read here, it reminded me of the military. You two guys know it. They break you down and bring you up their way.
God does the same thing.
Yeah.
But what type of education? I mean, it doesn't go into great detail, but how much did Joseph learn? About humility, about respect. About authority. The proper way to use it, the wrong way to use it. We talked about his leadership, which he does show,
Mhm.
but just like the officers you're talking about, you can get somebody that is made leader strictly by rank that got there without any experience, that has not a clue what they're doing. And then you have the guy that's worked up through the ranks. Which
Well,
one gets more respect? The guy that's been in combat and worked his way up through the ranks and did everything. I won't say the hard way, but the way that got him. All the background information he needed to do his job right, or the guy that graduated into it.
If you come across, you know, a leader. You know, a leader. Then you know another one wants to be, but there ain't no way he's gonna be. My respect goes to like that guy you just said, went through the chain of command. Worked hard and is a natural leader. And Joseph here is a natural leader.
If Joseph had went straight from the favorite child to second in Egypt, how many people, well,
You what, Brother Don?
He would have been extremely arrogant.
very likely, but even if he wasn't, how many people would say, well, you got there because your daddy bought it for you?
No, yeah. I think
Let's say that he was a very humble and still had his leadership abilities and didn't let it go to his head. But there's gonna be a certain number of people that said, you know what, you don't deserve to be there. You're just there because your daddy's rich. You're just there because of whatever excuse they wanna give. You, Bart, you said that about, people with the baseball. Or in football's the same way, when they're doing good, there's always, yeah, they had an easy season so far.
Yeah,
No one can say that when you came up as from the position of being a slave in prison, just waiting for your master's whim to have you put down any given day. Because you can forget the idea of due process and a trial before your peers here. That ain't happening. The moment Potiphar wakes up in a bad mood and his wife snagged him for the 100th time to get rid of this stupid Hebrew, his life is over.
Yeah.
I just wanted a phone. That must be the thinking.
But now he's gonna go from there, and I know we're foreshadowing here heavily, but. You know, anybody that comes up from that position earned it, every stripe.
God was conditioning me. That boils down to. He was conditioning.
All the way from his brothers.
Yeah,
God was with him the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
And no one's gonna say, well, you stole that position, you didn't earn it, you don't deserve it. Ain't nobody gonna tell him that.
Which of these situations do you think was hardest on Joseph? The rejection of his brothers?
Yeah.
Being sold into slavery to Potiphar? I mean, but before he knows anything about what's gonna happen. Is being sent to prison. Potiphar. Forget the things you see in the Disney movies and all this stuff, probably didn't happen that way. It says here he was angry and this was the first and the immediate could just throw his time in jail and lock him up and throw away the key.
I believe the rejection of his own family would.
Yeah.
That would have got to me.
I think that's where, that was the biggest
Yeah.
point of humbling, and I think that is
That would have
where
been it.
was in that cistern.
My own family put me here and now I'm still stumbling. And still having regret over what's going on, sold into slavery and wondering if it's ever gonna come to an end. And ends up in the palace, looks good, but
I think you're right, but also. It sure does kick you when you're like, man, I was down and it looked like things were looking up for me and now things are looking down again. I mean, that's pretty. I
was
agree.
getting somewhere, things are just
Yeah.
starting to straighten out and
that
there
old
you
woman
get
wanted
kicked
to-
again.
All for that
Transmission in
woman.
your truck. And getting that done, then your check engine light comes on. Now you need rings.
Yeah, and your head gasket blew.
We've all been there.
As the old joke goes, you know how you make God laugh? Tell him your plans.
Yeah.
I think the idea that Joseph had to rely entirely upon God, that he couldn't rely upon himself. And therefore he had to at some point place everything in God's hand, his life in God's hand, and to be subject to the will of God in each and every situation. Especially after the first one, I mean, just like I said, it's up and down, but those don't matter much because you're still a slave. You've been a slave since your brother sold you. And,
God was opening doors for him that no man can close. And he looked like his brothers were closing the door on him. But God opened that door for him.
God had a plan all the
Yeah.
way along, and he was never outside the will of God.
No.
That's the hard thing for us. He was never outside of God's will for his life. Even in that, bottom of the prison, down the dungeon, he was never outside. Now, when we recognize that, if we went through the same thing,
Little rough.
be a little rough, yes, it would be, it would. But I think that began and then it continued in bits and pieces with each and every up and down along the way. Hey, this is really good at oh, I gotta watch out for this lady, I'll get in a lot of trouble. He can have me killed, so I gotta kind of stay away, so I'm trying to be twice here, but it still comes back to Anna, because she more or less played the trap to get into nobody was around. And, he was in a, we like to say a win-win situation, he was in a lose-lose situation.
She had hots for him, yeah, he was not much he could do. Just stay away from her, but
Stay away from her for a while, but at a point in time, that all,
she was going, you know, she wanted,
he's determined.
you know. Handful of clothes. I'll show them to my hub.
And there's one thing I've seen from the last 2 chapters. The wrong woman can get a good man out of trouble.
All like Eve.
Well, there was a lot of movies made and a lot of hypothetical situations put to what it was like in prison for Joseph and, you know, at different places in the state. But they write a lot in there. I think we need to leave it pretty much as it says.
Agreed. I'm gonna say this, I was gonna go offline and say it, but I'll just say this online. It's without going too far ahead. The Egyptians had the Jews as slaves. It's pretty much a known fact around the world. I think there's too many people denying that. That God's people were slaves in Egypt. Almost everyone in the world knows that fact. So it's always interesting to me that we're showing here in Genesis how they get there. But people want to argue about the Bible as not being real. And we have a historical record right here in front of us that most people you get it from Celeste, what I'm trying to say here, beside secular history books know that the Egyptians and the Hebrews as slaves at one time. And they left. They know this. But here it is in the Bible right here. This, how they got here. So if how could you believe this and then realize, oh, they got here because of this? Now you're just going backwards. Now you're just going backwards. Now you're at Abraham. Now you're going back to Abraham got called. Now you're at the flood. Now you're back in Genesis. Well, that's the whole entire history of the world, right here in the first chapter of the Bible.
Yeah.
To the most major historical fact. Okay. That's.
Man, it's just pretty amazing to me that you can turn your TV on and you're still reading a story, really. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah,
and people say the book ain't true. I mean,
Oh, there's all sorts of people I always hear, well, you can't question the Egyptian timeline. We have that down too well. Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Well, the Jews were enslaved by the Egyptians for what, 400 years?
yes.
Yeah.
Most of the people that tell you there's no evidence for that. Don't go off the scriptural timeline for when the Jews were there. They try to go a much more recent date for that having been happening.
Yeah.
And so they're looking in the entirely